I work 2 jobs because one has never been enough. 6 days a week, I scrub the floors of downtown office towers from 6 in the morning until noon, then rush home to shower before my evening shift at Bellagio begins at 5. That Italian restaurant sits on a busy corner in Chicago's River North, a place where the yearly rent is probably higher than everything I make in an entire year of bending my back to survive. But the tips are good, especially when the bankers and lawyers walk in and swipe their company cards. I need those tips. I need every single dollar I can save. 3 years. That's how long Brent Walker had been in my life. In my life sounds too gentle. Brent invaded it, swallowed it whole until I could barely recognize the woman I used to be. Sophie was only 9 when he moved into our cramped little apartment on the south side. Back then, he was charming, attentive, always showing up with flowers and promising to help with rent, school fees, and the electric bill. 6 months later, the flowers were gone. The promises turned into threats. His so-called help became control. He banned me from wearing fitted clothes to work, made me video call him at exact times every night even if I was in the middle of serving customers. He could explode just because I replied to a message a minute too late. And every time he caught me keeping a few dollars of tip money instead of handing it all over, chairs would fly, glasses would break, curses would ricochet off the walls of our tiny home. I used to think I was strong, that I would never end up like my mother once did. But day by day, month by month, I felt myself shrink, fold inwards, reduced to a shadow trained to bow its head and endure to protect her child. I woke before dawn and returned after midnight. I lived in exhaustion so deep it felt bone deep, in fear that drained everything inside me. But what kept me from falling apart was the look in Sophie's eyes each time she whispered, "Mom, were you happy today?" I wouldn't lie to her, but I never had the courage to tell her the truth. Not until the day something happened, and everything began to change. If you're listening to this now and something about this story touches a quiet place inside you, please take a second to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video so we have the strength to keep bringing heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, would you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every word you share. Brent wasn't always the frightening man he is now. At least not in the beginning. Not in those first months when he stepped into my life and Sophie's. He knew exactly how to make a weary woman feel seen. He cooked dinner, took out the trash, played with Sophie like the father she never had. I once thought maybe, finally, I was lucky. But then, like a quiet door closing, the kindness faded. He began checking my phone, asking who I talked to, why it took me 3 minutes to walk from the bus stop upstairs. The first time he slapped me was over a bill I forgot to pay. I told him I simply forgot, but he said I was lying, stealing money to run away. I didn't fight back. I was too worn down to resist anything. Brent didn't work. He stayed home all day, smoking and watching television, occasionally running errands for an old friend of his, a loan shark whose name I never dared ask. He claimed he needed capital to start a business, but I knew he was dodging responsibility. Meanwhile, I bent my back to earn a living, bringing home every tip and handing him more than half, keeping only enough for gas and a few cartons of milk for Sophie. I started hiding money in an old sock tucked behind the fridge, but he found it. He hurled the entire bag against the wall, screaming that I had betrayed him. After that, I quietly opened a new bank account under my maiden name, Rachel Livingston, with the first $100 I managed to save after a late shift. I deposited a few tens each week, so little it wouldn't raise suspicion. I used my short lunch breaks to go to the bank, hiding the account book in an old novel under the bed where Sophie never touched. Once, he became suspicious and tore the bedroom apart searching. I stood in the kitchen, gripping a paring knife, my heart pounding like war drums. If he found it, if he discovered I was planning to leave, Sophie and I would never be safe. But he didn't. And I kept saving, dollar by dollar, like a woman climbing a hill in the dark, unable to see the top, only knowing she couldn't turn back. Every night, I watched my daughter sleep, her peaceful face so achingly beautiful, and swore that no matter what, I wouldn't let her grow up afraid. But swearing is easy. Living it is the hard part. I knew one wrong move, one look he didn't like. One night he drank too much everything could shatter, and I was still trapped in that cramped apartment with a man who could ignite into rage without warning. Until that day, when he came to Bellagio, and I finally understood how thin the line is between enduring and breaking. That night, Bellagio was busier than usual, the lights glowing off polished suits, and the soft clink of silverware rising like some elegant orchestra. I was standing at the bar waiting for appetizers for table 8, when the door swung open so hard the wind chimes rattled. I turned and saw Brent. He staggered inside, his eyes bloodshot, his collar wrinkled. I knew instantly he had been drinking, and my heart tightened like a fist. He scanned the restaurant as if hunting, and when he spotted me, he smiled a twisted smile I knew far too well. I turned away, pulled out my phone to text Luis, the shift manager, but before I could send it, Brent marched toward me, his voice echoing through the quiet room. There she is, acting all classy in this fancy place when she's nothing at home. A few customers turned. A woman in a silk dress stopped chewing. I felt their eyes on me when Brent grabbed my arm and yanked me back. I froze, desperate not to cause a bigger scene, but he grew louder. Where's the money? You've been dodging me. Where are your tips? Or are you hiding it to go fool around with some other guy? His breath reeked of alcohol, his words sharp as blades, and my cheeks burned with shame. I pulled away, stepping back, stammering, Brent, go home. This is my workplace. People are watching. But he didn't hear. He snatched the wallet from my apron and threw it to the floor, coins scattering, bills drifting under the customer's feet. I crouched down to pick them up out of reflex, my hands shaking, while he stood over me shouting, "Look at her! This is who you all respect? A servant hiding money from her husband so she can chase richer men?" And then heavy, steady footsteps sounded behind me. Brent hadn't even turned before a cold, controlled voice cut through the room, not loud, but enough to still the air. "I'm going to ask you to leave, now." I stood, turning, and saw Nathan Callahan. He wore a black wool coat, his tie loosened as if he'd come straight from the office. His eyes weren't angry, they were cold, an icy calm far more frightening than rage. Brent sneered. "Who are you? Her new guy? Or just some rich boss who thinks he can order people around?" Nathan didn't answer. He stared directly into Brent's eyes, taking one step closer, then another. Brent backed away, startled, as though he suddenly realized he wasn't facing some ordinary restaurant owner. Nathan stopped an arm's length away and spoke evenly. "You have 2 choices. 1, walk out that door and never show your face to her again. 2, my men will remove you in a way you won't want to remember." Brent squinted, jaw tight, ready to spit another curse, then turned, mumbling something slurred and angry, stumbling toward the door like a defeated animal. When it shut behind him, the restaurant fell silent, breathless. I stood frozen, clutching my torn wallet, my eyes meeting Nathan's. No pity, no judgment, just a steady presence, as if he had quietly built a wall between me and the storm. And I knew, in that moment, something in my life had begun to shift, even if I didn't yet understand how. After Brent was thrown out of the restaurant, the atmosphere inside Bellagio slowly returned to something like normal, or at least everyone pretended it did. I bowed my head as I wiped up the scattered bills on the floor, my hands trembling so badly I had to clutch the cloth tight just to keep from showing it. Luis told me to go take a break. I nodded and hurried toward the staff room, praying no one would follow. But when the door closed behind me, Nathan was already standing there, as if he had been waiting. I startled, still gripping my torn wallet. He looked at me, his eyes neither sharp nor soft, quiet, as though he was weighing each word before speaking. I spoke first, my voice low. "Thank you for earlier. I'm sorry for the trouble." He shook his head. "None of this is your fault, and no one should thank me for doing what's right." I sat down on the plastic chair against the wall, hiding the hand clutching the hem of my skirt. Nathan stepped closer, stopping at a distance close enough to speak softly, far enough not to overwhelm me. His voice was calm, but unmistakably clear. "Has he ever hurt you?" I shook my head immediately, so quickly even I didn't believe myself. "No, nothing serious. Brent is just a little hot-tempered. He doesn't mean anything by it." I heard my own voice tremble when I said the words, "he," and I despised myself for it. Nathan said nothing at first. He sat down across from me, arms folded, eyes steady. "I'm not the police. You don't need to protect him." I swallowed hard, silent. Then he spoke. Again, gentler this time, as if carefully lifting a thin layer of fabric. I saw the bruise on your arm the other day, and the way you look away whenever someone asks about your family. I've seen this before, and I don't think tonight was the first time he came looking for you. I bit my lip, a tight ache rising in my throat. I didn't want anyone to know. Not because I was ashamed of being treated badly, but because admitting it meant acknowledging I had lived this way for far too long. I tried to smile, but my mouth twisted instead. I'm fine. I'm used to it. I know how to keep things from getting worse. Nathan leaned back, still watching me with patience that felt almost painful. You have a daughter. Do you really think she won't notice? Children aren't blind. They just stay quiet. I blinked, feeling as if someone had slammed a hand into my chest. Sophie. The image of her curled under a blanket, eyes wide open in the dark each time Brent's shouting, shook the living room, rose sharp as a blade. I lifted a hand to cover my face, unwilling to cry, unwilling to break in front of the man who had just shielded me from humiliation. But the tears came anyway, quietly, like a sudden rain without warning. Nathan didn't touch me. He simply sat there, giving me space, letting me fall apart in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in years. When I finally looked up, eyes red, his voice came again so soft it almost wasn't there. I don't want to intrude on your private life, Rachel, but if you need help, if your daughter needs a safe place, I can help. I searched his face, trying to see if this was pity or some moral performance, but it wasn't. All I saw was seriousness. A genuine offer without strings. I nodded, not a yes, not really, but not a no either. And for the first time in years, I felt not entirely alone. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way out somewhere ahead. By the time I reached the apartment, the clock's hands were nearing 1 a.m. Outside, the air was bitter cold, the wind whistling through the cracks in the hallway like some lonely cry, but not as cold as the feeling in my chest as I slid the key into the old lock coming loose from its hinges. I stood there a long moment, listening. The inside was dark, unnervingly quiet. No blaring television, no heavy footsteps, no beer cans rolling across the floor. I pushed the door open and flicked on the light, and my heart plummeted. The living room looked like it had been hit by a storm. The sofa was torn open, red velvet fabric ripped apart like exposed organs. The table lamp was smashed, its shattered bulb scattered across the floor in hundreds of sharp pieces. Sophie's picture frames were overturned, the glass cracked as though someone had deliberately stepped on them. I hadn't even drawn a full breath when a loud crash erupted from the bedroom, followed by Brent's voice roaring, "You think you're smart, huh? Think someone's backing you now? So you can walk away from me?" I ran toward the room, my pulse pounding in my ears, and saw Sophie curled in the corner of her bed, hands clamped over her ears, face pale as chalk. Brent stood in the middle of the room holding her plastic study chair, hurling it at the bookshelf. I threw myself between him and my daughter without thinking, shouting, "That's enough, Brent. You're out of your mind." He panted heavily, eyes bloodshot, wild, a man no longer in control of anything inside him. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. I went to your workplace to talk, and you let that boss of yours humiliate me. What am I to you, Rachel?" I clenched my fists, voice dropping low as I struggled to contain the rising terror spilling through me. "You came drunk. You destroyed the place. You scared her half to death. If there's even a trace of decency left in you, you need to leave right now." Brent laughed, a dry metallic sound scraping against his ada, my nerves. "Oh, so now you've found your voice? Good. Let's see how you survive without me." He stormed out, kicking the door so hard it slammed into the wall with a crack. The whole apartment trembled. I turned to Sophie. She still hadn't opened her eyes. I sat beside her, pulling her small, trembling body into my arms, feeling her shake like a leaf in the wind. "It's okay now, baby. Mommy's here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was comforting her or myself. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by her bed, holding her hand, staring at the crack on the ceiling I had memorized over 3 long years. I had lived with fear, with silence, with the fragile hope that if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, things would improve. But not anymore. Not after seeing Sophie's eyes. Not after feeling the weight of despair in her tiny shoulders. The next morning, while Brent lay passed out on the living room chair, reeking of alcohol, I quietly packed a few sets of place, Clothes into a backpack. I didn't take much, only what mattered. The savings I had withdrawn from the bank the morning before were ready. I wrote a short note and left it on the table. My daughter and I will not come back. Do not look for us. I took Sophie's hand and led her out the same door I once entered with hope. And this time, I knew with absolute certainty I would not return. Whatever waited ahead, I would choose it. For her, and for myself. The black SUV pulled quietly to a stop in front of a 3-story brick house in Lincoln Park just before the sun had fully risen. Nathan had sent someone to bring my daughter and me there after a hurried dawn phone call. I held Sophie tight in the back seat, my hand never leaving her small one from the moment we left the apartment. She had fallen asleep, exhausted, perhaps beyond exhaustion. As for me, though my eyes were heavy, my guard stayed sharp. The guest house sat in a quiet residential neighborhood, behind a tall iron gate, a row of trees lining the walkway, far removed from the noise and chaos of where I used to live. The driver opened the door and bowed slightly as I stepped out. A middle-aged woman stood waiting at the entrance, her silver hair tied neatly, her eyes gentle and her voice soft as she introduced herself as Martha, the longtime housekeeper for the Callahan family. She led us inside. The guest house felt strangely warm, carrying the faint smell of freshly baked bread and soft music drifting from a small speaker on a shelf. Nothing flashy, nothing ostentatious, just a quiet warmth that wrapped around you like a pair of reassuring arms. I laid Sophie on the white-sheeted bed in a room on the second floor, where the first light of morning slipped through the curtains and touched her small face. For the first time in many weeks, I saw her breathing evenly, deeply. I sat at the edge of the bed, brushing my fingers lightly through her hair. Somewhere deep within me, the caution remained. I didn't know what sunrise would bring. I didn't understand why Nathan was doing so much for someone like me. I had grown used to help that always came with conditions, hidden costs, invisible debts, and I was afraid of stepping into a world that wasn't mine. When I walked downstairs, Martha had already prepared 2 mugs of hot cocoa and some peanut butter toast. She smiled as she handed me the tray, asking no probing questions, offering no scrutinizing looks. I whispered a thank you, my thoughts still tangled and restless. It wasn't until Sophie woke up, sat on the bed, and asked sleepily, "Mom, how long will we stay here?" that I realized what I needed most wasn't certainty, it was a moment to breathe. "Just for a while, sweetheart, until things get better," I answered, forcing a smile. Sophie looked around the room, then nodded, pulled the blanket to her chest, and murmured, "It's really quiet here. I like it." Just those simple words softened. Something inside me. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, my daughter felt safe. And for me, that was enough to know I had made the right choice. I didn't know whether Nathan could truly help us escape this nightmare for good. But when night fell, in the small room lit by a warm amber lamp, I finally allowed my eyes to close without straining to interpret every sound in the dark. And that, for me, was a beginning. The morning shift passed in peaceful monotony. I poured coffee, took orders, straightened napkins, moving through the motions like a machine wired to perform. The restaurant wasn't crowded yet, sunlight spilling through the windows in pale streaks across the dark wooden tables. Everything felt steady, rhythmic, almost as if I were taking small steps out of the shadows. Sophie had begun her online lessons in the guest house's living room, with Martha always nearby, reminding her to eat breakfast, checking her assignments, and sending me photos every afternoon. I relied on those pictures to keep going, to believe a quieter future could be real. I was wiping down the menus when the phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out. Martha's name lit the screen. I answered as I walked quickly toward the kitchen, assuming she was calling about Sophie's favorite pastries, but her voice came through different, lower, trembling. "Rachel, I can't find Sophie." My heart stopped. What do you mean?" My words shot out too fast, too loud. "She's not in her room. I went up to call her for lunch and she wasn't there. I've searched the whole house, even the yard. There's no sign of her. The doors were locked. No strangers came in." I rushed out of the kitchen, my pulse pounding like an alarm bell. I was already dialing back as I ran toward the staff lounge. "Call Nathan. Right now. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I don't remember what I told Luis to excuse myself mid-shift, just the look of worry in his eyes as I dropped my apron and pushed through the back door. I hailed a taxi, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my wallet onto the floor of the cab. The entire ride, all I could think about were Sophie's little pink shoes, the strand of hair I braided every morning, and the question clawing at me: what if Brent had found us? I couldn't say the words out loud. When the cab pulled up to the gate, Nathan was already waiting, shirt sleeves rolled up, phone pressed to his ear, his expression tight as a wire. I ran toward him, breathless. "Anything yet?" He shook his head. "No, but I have people checking the neighborhood cameras. Go inside with Martha. I'll handle the rest." I rushed into the house, finding Martha at the dining table, her face buried in her hands. She looked up when she heard me, her eyes wet. "I'm so sorry, Rachel." I looked away for just a few minutes. I didn't blame her. I only squeezed her hand and hurried upstairs. The room was empty, Sophie's pillow, still warm. A half-finished drawing sat on the desk, a house, a mother, a brown-haired girl, and a tall man standing beside them. The picture wasn't colored yet. I sank to the floor, numb, except for the panic, swallowing everything inside me. My phone rang again. "Nathan." "Listen carefully, Rachel. The street camera shows a little girl walking alone toward the bus stop. She's wearing a pink coat and carrying a purple bag. That's Sophie, right?" My breath caught. "Yes, that's her." "Good. My team is following her route. I'll update you as soon as we find more." I stood and ran outside. The sky was heavy and gray, the wind cutting down the street. Only one thought existed in my mind. Sophie was out there, alone, and I needed to reach her before anything else could. Sophie left the house just as the kitchen clock struck 11:30. She had placed a small note next to her unfinished cup of milk, the pencil marks unsteady but determined. "Mom, don't worry, I go. Find you, I know the way." She wore the pink coat I had washed the day before, her worn sneakers, and her purple backpack inside it, only her tiny stuffed bear and a granola bar Martha always packed in the mornings. She slipped out the side door, quiet as a whisper, and followed the sidewalk toward the main road. She didn't wait for the driver. She didn't call me, because she believed what she was doing was right. In a child's mind, wherever her mother is, that is the safest place, and Bellagio was the last place she had seen me leave from. Sophie remembered the streets, the signs, the bakery with the smiley face stickers on the window she had noticed the first time we passed by. She avoided strangers, spoke to no one, kept walking fast with her head slightly down, her eyes fixed on her shoes as if counting her steps to keep from getting lost. When a man pulled over and asked if she was lost, Sophie stepped back, shook her head, and turned into a narrow alley. She had learned that from me, from the countless warnings not to trust strangers, no matter how kind they pretended to be. She crossed 2 neighborhoods, her legs growing tired, sweat gathering beneath her coat despite the winter weather. She rested briefly on the steps of an old bookstore, opened her backpack, took a small bite of her granola bar, and kept going. Her young face was set with determination, her eyes focused as if she carried the weight of the world on her small shoulders. When Nathan called again to tell me that a camera near Bellagio had caught her waiting at a crosswalk, I nearly collapsed. I didn't know whether to cry or thank the sky. She was only a few blocks away from me. Nathan picked me up in his car, and as we turned onto a tree-lined street, I saw her. Sophie stood in front of the restaurant, her face smudged with dust, her hair falling messily over her forehead, but her eyes unwavering. I jumped out of the car and called her name. "Sophie!" She turned, and in that instant, her whole face crumpled into relief. I rushed to her, dropping to my knees on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around her as if letting go would make her disappear. My tears soaked her coat as her little arms clung to my neck. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," I whispered again and again. Sophie pressed her face into my shoulder and whispered through her tears, "I just wanted to come to you. I didn't want to be at home without you." I held her head gently, feeling her heartbeat racing like a drum, and something inside me cracked open. I had put too much weight on those tiny shoulders. I thought I was protecting her by leaving Brent, by bringing her somewhere safe, but I had forgotten the simplest truth. To a child, safety is where her mother is, and I had left her alone. As I carried Sophie back to the car, her small arms wrapped around my neck, her head resting on my shoulder like a breath of warmth, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: I could never let this happen again. I had to do more than run. I had to fight so my daughter would never again have to find her way back to where she belonged. That afternoon, After Sophie had fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion, I sat in Nathan's living room with a cup of tea that had long gone cold in my hands. Everything could have been far worse if she hadn't been smart and cautious enough. Thinking about it sent a shiver through me. I didn't say it out loud, but deep down I knew only one person had the motive and the ability to push Sophie so far out of her sense of safety that she would leave on her own. Brent. No one else. I had no proof, but I felt it. Maybe it was a phone call, a message, or simply a presence lurking somewhere beyond the gate, and Nathan knew it too. He walked into the room, coat still on his shoulders, his eyes colder than usual. Behind him was Anthony, the tall man with knife-sharp eyes who accompanied Nathan whenever decisiveness was required. Nathan sat across from me, placed his phone on the table, and looked straight into my eyes. Brent is still keeping tabs on you. I nodded slightly, not surprised. I don't know how he figured out where she was, but I know he found a way. Nathan tilted his head, his voice steady and low, as if he were discussing strategy in a boardroom instead of speaking to a mother who had just lived through terror. Then he won't have a way anymore. He turned to Anthony and gave a curt nod. Starting tonight, I want every phone number, email, and social media account he could use to reach her shut down. If necessary, wipe Rachel's phone clean and change her number. Cut every line. Anthony nodded silently and pulled out his phone, typing with the speed of someone who had done this hundreds of times. I looked at Nathan. Something in the way he issued orders made me feel both safe and frightened. I whispered, "So, I'll disappear completely from his radar?" Nathan leaned forward, his eyes, steady and deep, as if anchoring something inside me. "You won't disappear, he will. From your world, he will no longer have the ability to reach you or your daughter. Not one more time." I clasped my hands together, trying to keep my composure. It wasn't that I still cared for Brent, I didn't. It was that no one had ever protected me like this before. Not with passivity, not with pity, but with decisive action, the kind taken by a man who understood the line between safety and harm. Anthony slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Nathan remained in his seat, silent, watching me. I saw the faintest pull at the corner of his mouth, as though he were thinking something deeper than words aloud. After a moment he spoke, slowly, each word weighted. "If he dares come back, next time it won't just be cutting his lines of contact. I won't let it get that far." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need the details. But for the first time, I understood I was no longer fighting for peace alone, and I also understood something else. Nathan Callahan was not the kind of man who issued warnings he wasn't prepared to carry out. I returned to Bellagio on a cloudy morning, wearing a freshly pressed white blouse and my hair pulled back tighter than usual. This time, I wasn't standing behind the espresso machine or carrying plates across the dining room. My new position was at the front guest coordinator, a role that required awareness, quick thinking, and the kind of confidence I thought I had lost long ago. Nathan had suggested it. He said I had a way of noticing small details, of understanding what guests needed even before they said it, and that Bellagio needed someone like that as the first point of contact. I didn't know if he truly believed that or if he was giving me a way to rebuild myself, but I accepted the offer like a lifeline in deep water. On my first day, I stood behind the host stand, watching people come in with all kinds of expressions: excitement, fatigue, curiosity. I greeted them with a light smile and steady eyes, pointing them to the right tables, making small talk just enough to ease their arrival. An elderly couple celebrating their 30th anniversary, I seated them by the window overlooking the park where the leaves had begun to turn. A group of business clients arriving late for their reservation, I rearranged tables smoothly so no one had to wait long. At first, my hands trembled when I picked up the internal phone or scribbled special notes onto a ticket, but slowly, the trembling faded. In its place bloomed a steady rhythm, a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just doing well. I was owning the space. Luis stopped by several times, giving me short nods of approval whenever he saw the flow of the room. "You doing okay?" he asked at the end of my first shift, when the restaurant had quieted. I nodded, a natural smile spreading across my face, so natural it surprised even me. I really like this job." He patted my shoulder and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with a quiet, unfamiliar sense of relief. When I arrived back at the guest house, Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table coloring beside Martha. She ran to me when I stepped through the door, her voice bright with excitement. "What did you do today? Was it busy? Are you tired, Mom?" I wrapped my arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair that grounded me instantly. "I worked at the front, like someone who welcomes people, organizes things, and makes everyone feel good coming into the restaurant." Sophie lifted her head, her eyes shining. "Like the keeper of the keys?" I laughed softly and nodded. "Yes, I suppose so." That night, after she fell asleep, I stood alone on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker awake. I thought about all the mornings I used to fear, all the days I wondered if I would ever do anything other than endure. And now, step by step, I was entering a new world. Not perfect, not easy, but a world I was building for myself. Nathan didn't say much in those early days of my new role, but every time I caught his gaze from across the restaurant, from the upstairs office or through the glass hallway, it was always the same. He believed in me, and because of that, I wanted to prove he was right. I didn't need someone to save me. I just needed a chance to stand on my own. And now, I finally had it. That night, the restaurant closed later than usual, after a private birthday party in the upstairs VIP room. I stayed behind to go over the weekend reservation schedule and review a few seating adjustments with Luis. By the time I stepped out of the coordination area, the hallway lights had dimmed, leaving only the soft glow reflected off the crystal chandeliers overhead. I was heading toward the exit when I saw Nathan standing alone by the bar, his coat draped over a brise chair, a glass of dark liquor in his hand. He didn't turn, but somehow he knew I was there. "You're here late," he said, his voice low and steady, blending easily with the stillness of a long night. I slowed my steps, hesitating. "I just finished up. I was just passing by." Nathan set his glass down and turned toward me. The muted lighting sharpened the lines of his face, both strong and quietly worn. A long silence stretched between us. Then he spoke, softly, so softly I had to lean in to catch it. "My sister used to be like you." I frowned slightly, not yet understanding, but he was already looking straight at me, his voice even and emotionless, as if he were reciting an old chapter of his life he rarely revisited. "Her name was Lily. She was 7 years younger than me. When our parents died, I was the only one who could take care of her. She was smart, gentle, and had a smile that could make anyone turn to look. And then she loved the wrong man. I didn't say anything. I just listened." His gaze drifted away from me toward the large window where the distant city shimmered under faint, yellow lights. At first, everything seemed perfect. He was a young attorney, smooth-talking, polite to everyone, always showing up with flowers on the weekends. But after a year, Lily started avoiding my eyes. Then she wore long sleeves through the whole summer. When I asked, she blamed work stress, slipping on stairs, any excuse someone desperate to hide the truth might give. Nathan's voice faltered for a beat before he took a sip of his drink. I noticed the way his hand tightened around the glass, as if holding back a memory pressing too hard. I didn't push. I thought if I gave her time, she'd talk. But I was wrong. One winter night, the police called me. They said Lily had been taken to the emergency room with internal injuries. 3 days later, she didn't make it. A coldness washed through me. My hand lifted, reflexively to my chest, as if my heart needed steadying. Nathan still wasn't looking at me. He continued, his voice low, as if each word was pulled from a wound that had never fully closed. "I'm strong. I control things. I handle 100 decisions a day, but I couldn't protect my only sister. I was too late. And I swore to myself I would never let that happen again to anyone I could help." His voice softened even more, weighted with something raw and unguarded. I stepped closer and laid my hand gently on his arm. Not out of pity, but because I understood. I understood that look in his eyes, that quiet, heavy silence, and the way he had been watching over me and Sophie since the very beginning. Not because he felt obligated, not because he wanted to play savior, but because he had known loss, and in the hollow left behind, he had chosen action instead of helplessness. Nathan turned toward me, his eyes gentler now, stripped of their usual icy edge. "I don't tell this story to anyone, but with you, I thought you should know." I nodded. There was nothing more to say. Some grief doesn't need words, it only needs to be seen. And in that moment, for the first time, something stirred inside me deeper than gratitude or trust. Perhaps it was the beginning of a feeling I once believed I had lost the ability to experience. That night, a light rain fell, streaking the guesthouse kitchen windows like slow, quiet notes falling into the growing stillness between Nathan and me. After Sophie went to bed, I made 2 mugs of hot cocoa and carried them out to the back porch where Nathan stood alone, hands in his pockets, staring into the garden as though following some distant thought. He turned when he heard my footsteps and nodded in greeting. I handed him a mug, our fingers brushing for a brief second that sent a jolt straight through my chest. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Only the sound of rain and the warmth of the mug in my hands filled the space. I glanced toward Sophie's bedroom window, where the amber nightlight glowed softly through the curtains. Nathan spoke first, his voice low and warm, like wind sliding beneath the eaves. He talked about the long day, about how Bellagio was shifting, about small things that shouldn't have been enough to make me smile. But I smiled anyway, not because of the words, but because of the way he looked at me, as though I mattered enough for him to linger there beside me. I turned toward him, and the question slipped out before I realized I was speaking. Do you ever feel afraid? Letting someone into your life again? Nathan didn't answer right away. He set his mug down on the railing, stepped closer, and kept his eyes on mine. Yes, but I'm more afraid of letting someone walk away without trying to hold on. My heart pounded, my fingers tightening around the warm ceramic until my knuckles turned pale. Nathan stood close enough that I could feel his breath. And when his lips touched mine, slow, gentle, certain I didn't pull away. It wasn't a kiss born of impulse or hollow promises. It was a kiss between 2 people who had survived hurt and were finding themselves again in the presence of another. When we parted, his gaze stayed on me, and I let out a long breath, as if shedding a shell I had carried for far too long. The next morning, Sophie woke earlier than usual. She wore her favorite flowered dress and rushed down to the kitchen where Nathan and I were making breakfast. She paused in the doorway, tilted her head, and asked shyly, "Mr. N, can you help me cut my apple?" I looked at Nathan and saw a rare, tender smile soften his features. He bent down, took the apple from her tiny hands, and said, "Of course, kiddo." From that moment on, Sophie called him Mr. N, as though he had always been part of this home. She followed him into the garden, told him about school, showed him every drawing she made, and even insisted he learn a few dance steps from an animated video she liked. I watched from across the room, my heart full of emotions woven together: surprise, gratitude, and something deeper I wasn't yet brave enough to name. But when Sophie rested her head on Nathan's shoulder while they watched television, and he gently placed a hand on her back to steady her, I knew that feeling was growing inside me, and this time, I wasn't afraid. I was straightening a stack of newly printed menus when I received a call from an unknown number, just a string of digits. No name. Instinctively, I almost declined, but something made my hand freeze. I answered, and the moment I heard the voice, my entire body turned to ice. "Hello, Rachel. Miss my voice? Brent." My breath snagged in my throat, my heart pounding like it was being dragged back into a darkness I had tried so hard to escape. He let out a low chuckle, the same sound he made when he was about to do something that terrified me. "You really thought you could disappear without me knowing? Cute." I looked around the restaurant. Nothing had changed, customers chatting, coworkers carrying plates, but the world inside me collapsed again. I pulled the phone away from my ear, shut it off, and hurried behind the counter, my hands shaking so violently I dropped the entire stack of menus. I took leave immediately and called Nathan. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in his office, my hands trembling even after finishing the cup of hot tea Martha had given me. Nathan listened silently as I recounted the call, then picked up his phone and dialed Anthony. "I want the full call history and location of the number that contacted Rachel, and check any unusual transactions in the last 2 weeks involving Brent Walker." He hung up and turned to me, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "He didn't call just to frighten you. If he reached out, that means he sold your information. The only question is to whom?" My voice cracked. "You think he sold my information?" Nathan nodded once, his eyes never leaving mine. "With men like him, you're nothing but leverage. A bargaining chip when they have nothing left." 2 days later, Anthony returned with confirmation. Brent had met with an intermediary linked to a Russian crew in Philadelphia, a group specializing in collecting personal information on anyone with even distant ties to the underworld, especially those connected to the Callahan name. With an address, a schedule, a few photos, and even my work hours at Bellagio, they had all they needed to consider me valuable. Nathan went still as he listened, his jaw tightening. When Anthony left the room, he walked to the window and stared out at the city without blinking. After a long moment, he turned back toward me, his voice so low I had to strain to hear it. I should have seen this coming. He isn't smart enough to act on his own, but he's dirty enough to sell out the woman who lived with him for 3 years. I held my head, a wave of dizziness hitting me like a punch. Everything I had tried to build, step by fragile step, suddenly felt like a house without a foundation. I thought of Sophie, of her innocent eyes as she played in the backyard, and fear spread through me like a slow-burning fire. Nathan stepped closer, rested a hand on my shoulder, and gave it a firm, steady squeeze. They won't get to you, but I need you to be ready. From now on, everything will be different. We have to stay ahead. I nodded, my eyes too dry for tears, held upright only by a cold, sharp clarity, the kind that comes when you know the storm isn't avoidable anymore, only survivable. Dawn had barely begun to lift when a group of uniformed inspectors stormed into Bellagio, badges clipped to their chests, and an air of premeditated purpose written all over them. I was helping Luis adjust the lunch seating chart when the large glass doors swung open, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing sharply across the polished floor, followed by a firm voice announcing, "We're from the city's Food Safety Division. Bellagio is subject to an unannounced inspection, prompted by an anonymous complaint." Nathan had just stepped down from his second-floor office and froze at the first stare when he saw what was happening. His eyes went cold almost instantly, though his face remained as composed as ever, the same practiced calm he carried into every unexpected threat. He walked down slowly, each step a quiet assertion of control. I stood beside Luis, hands clenched together, trying to steady myself. Everything was happening too fast, and far too precisely timed for it to be a coincidence. Within 10 minutes, the kitchen was ordered to halt operations, and every employee was separated for individual questioning. They examined every delivery invoice, every unopened box of ingredients, even opened the staff's personal refrigerator. A middle-aged man with black-rimmed glasses flipped through the temperature logs as if searching for the slightest misstep to record. It was all too thorough, too organized, to be a standard spot check. I glanced over at Nathan. He was speaking with the lead inspector, his voice low and firm, not arguing, not defensive, just drawing boundaries. But I could tell he was calculating every angle. After nearly an hour, one of the inspectors announced they'd found an imported cheese shipment with a supplemental label blurred by condensation, and its placement was off from the regulatory divider by exactly 1 centimeter. Luis immediately protested, his face flushing red, because it was clearly a trivial detail blown out of proportion, with no impact on food safety whatsoever. But the inspector wrote it down coldly as a serious storage violation, then moved on to inspect the wastewater system behind the restaurant. Nathan called Anthony a few minutes later. When Anthony walked in, his posture straight, his gaze sharp, sweeping across the room, no one dared speak. He handed Nathan a thin file containing a copy of the complaint sent to the city health department 2 days earlier, unsigned and routed through a masked IP address. Nathan finished reading, his expression turning hard as stone. He stepped out of the lobby and into the back hallway behind the kitchen, and I followed without a word. When the door closed behind us, he braced one hand against the frame and stood silent for several seconds. Then he turned to me, his voice flat and cold. "This is a warning shot. They're not trying to strike directly, at least not yet. They're probing my defenses, measuring my reaction." I swallowed hard, my entire body pulled taut like a string ready to snap. "Do you think Brent is behind this?" Nathan shook his head, lips pressed tight, jaw tensed. "He doesn't have the reach for something like this, but the people who bought your information from him do, and they don't bother with old-school scare tactics. They want to hit my reputation, to see who'll stand with me when things start to crack." My stomach sank. I understood too well what that meant. Bellagio wasn't just a restaurant, it was a symbol, the centerpiece of the power network Nathan had built for years. A fracture here could ripple outward across everything. Nathan looked at me again, and this time his eyes softened slightly. "You don't need to worry. No one will touch you or Sophie, But I need you ready. Things may not stay peaceful from here. I nodded without hesitation. I was no longer the woman trembling in dark corners. I had risen to my feet. And now that danger was knocking, I wasn't turning away. I would fight for Sophie, for myself, and for the man standing in the storm to protect us both. Nathan sat in his second-floor office, tapping his fingers lightly against the wooden desk, as though calculating every move of a chess match where each piece could lead to bloodshed. The soft golden glow from the desk lamp carved shadows along his face, revealing tension he usually kept hidden. I stepped inside, closing the door quietly before standing still for a few seconds. Nathan looked up, his eyes meeting mine, alert, but not closed off. I took a slow breath and spoke, trying to keep my voice steady even as my heart pounded. I want to go with you to the meeting with them. Nathan's fingers stopped tapping. He leaned back in his chair, studying me as if weighing whether my words came from impulse or from a deliberate choice. He didn't speak for several seconds, simply watched me. Then he asked, his voice low and cutting, "Do you understand what you just said?" I nodded and stepped closer. "This isn't about curiosity or proving I'm strong. I know they're not only coming for you, they want to use me as part of the game. If I'm there, at least I'll know what I'm facing." He remained silent, but something eased in his eyes. Just a fraction. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out at the city slowly being swallowed by nightfall. When he turned back, his expression had changed, not doubt anymore, but a heavy, deliberate consideration. They're Dimitri's people. They're not the kind who sit down to hear reason. They show up to deliver a message. Once you stand in front of them, you won't be invisible anymore. I curled my hands into gentle fists and held his gaze. I'm not invisible. They already know about me, about Sophie, about my past. No amount of staying away will protect me if they truly want to strike. At least let me stand beside you, not sit at home waiting for news. Another silence settled dense, as if even the room was holding its breath. Finally, Nathan walked toward me and stopped within arm's reach. He spoke slowly, each word carving itself into me. "All right, you'll go, but you'll promise me a few things. First, you don't interrupt anything while I'm speaking. Second, if I signal you, you leave immediately, no questions. And third, if things go bad, you protect yourself first, then think about me." I nodded, my throat tightening because I knew this wasn't just a conversation, it was a threshold. One step away from a place where life and death could hinge on a glance. Nathan held out his hand, palm open. I placed mine into it, feeling the warmth and resolve in his grip. He closed his fingers gently around mine, sealing the decision. "We meet them tomorrow night, at the old warehouse on Dock 19. I'll have people watching every angle, but until then, you don't leave the guest house without someone with you." I nodded again, fear and relief twisting together inside me. Fear because I was stepping into a world I had only ever glimpsed in nightmares. Relief because, for the first time, I wasn't letting others fight for me from the outside. I was choosing to stand in it, fully aware, fully awake, and with whatever courage I could gather. And I knew, from this moment on, there was no turning back. The message arrived while I was making tea in the kitchen, the soft morning light spilling through the window and calming the lingering anxieties from the night before. Anthony's text contained only one line: "Brent Walker, confirmed dead in Philadelphia, preliminary cause, drug-induced shock." I read the words again and again, as if my mind needed extra time to process them. Brent, the man who had haunted my life for 3 long years, who had monitored every step I took, every breath I drew, no longer existed in this world. I sat down with my phone still in my hand, and the first thing I felt wasn't pain, wasn't fear, but a strange, hollow quiet. No tears, no scream, just an empty stillness stretching through me, as if my whole body were waiting for my heart to tell it what to feel. But when I set the cup down and opened the window to let in the crisp morning air, something became clear to me. I felt lighter, as though an invisible weight that had pressed on my chest for years had finally dropped away without making a sound. No more eyes watching me from the shadows. No more anonymous calls jolting me awake in the dead of night. No more nightmares shaped by his voice. Brent had slipped out of this world the same way he had lived in it, quietly, filthily, and through his own destruction. Nathan arrived not long after. He said nothing when I opened the door, only handed me a thin envelope containing a copy of the forensic report forwarded through an official channel. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I'd lived enough to understand that some truths don't need to be read in order to be fully known. I sat on the sofa, and Nathan sat beside me, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel him there like a steady wall. I asked quietly, almost afraid that saying the words would make them real. "You're certain he wasn't killed, right?" Nathan looked at me with his usual calm. "It wasn't me. It wasn't my people." Cameras show he walked into the hotel alone. No one followed. The room showed signs of drug overuse, no evidence of struggle. I nodded and didn't ask anything more. Part of me had once wanted him to pay, but now that his end had come naturally, and without anyone else's blood, I realized I didn't need vengeance. I only needed freedom. Sophie wandered out from her room with her hair tousled from sleep, her eyes still foggy. When she saw Nathan, she smiled and climbed into his lap as naturally as breathing. "Mr. N, have breakfast with us today," she said. Nathan brushed her hair back and looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I smiled, the first real smile I'd had in days, one unburdened and whole. "Today is a new day," I said softly, "and we're starting it without any shadows behind us." Nathan didn't answer. He simply nodded. And I stood, walking to the kitchen to make peace. Breakfast, my hands steady, my heart unweighted. Brent's death didn't make me triumphant, but his leaving was the ending I needed in order to fully live again. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. Later that afternoon, Nathan took Sophie and me to a small riverside park, just as the sun began its slow descent, casting gold over the rippling water like a trail of glitter. The autumn breeze moved through the trees, shaking down a few yellow leaves that drifted lazily onto the gravel path. Sophie skipped ahead of us, hopping over cracks in the walkway as if it were the most important game she'd ever played. I walked beside Nathan, my hand resting inside his, my heart unusually peaceful. No Brent, no lurking fear, only breath and stillness and the sweetness of shared silence. When we reached a shady patch of grass near the water, Sophie ran toward the ducks paddling in the pond, leaving Nathan and me standing on the lawn. He turned to me, his expression serious but gentle. "Rachel," he said, "I once believed my life would be nothing but work and shallow connections. After losing Lily, I didn't think I had it in me to truly attach to anyone again. But you and Sophie changed everything. You walked into my life quietly. You never demanded anything, and yet you brought courage with you, this unwavering refusal to give up." He paused, then slowly lowered himself onto one knee, opening his hand to reveal a small, shimmering ring. "Marry me, Rachel. Be Sophie's mother in name as well as in love. Be the person I want to build the rest of my life with." I froze, my heart stumbling in my chest. My eyes stung with tears, my mouth parting though no words came. Before I could speak, Sophie turned around, saw Nathan kneeling, and sprinted back to us. She clutched at my shirt, eyes wide. "Mom, what's Mr. Nathan doing?" I knelt to her level, tucking her hair behind her ear, smiling, through the trembling in my chest. "He's asking if we want to become a family with him." Sophie looked at Nathan, her eyes timid, then suddenly bright. "If Mom says yes, can I call you Dad?" Nathan's eyes glistened. He nodded, unable to speak, and opened his arms as Sophie threw herself around him. I watched them, feeling something inside me settle into place, like pieces of my heart finally finding where they belonged. I moved closer, kneeling beside them, and whispered my answer through tears that were made of pure happiness. "Yes, I do. Yes, we're a family." And in that moment, with my hand in his, Sophie leaning against me, and her small voice whispering, "Dad," with a certainty stronger than any vow, I knew I had found home. Not a place these two people, Nathan's warm hand around mine, my daughter's laughter rising unbroken, and the sense of peace that begins with courage and ends with a promise never to let go. That afternoon, the Chicago sky was uncommonly clear, as if the whole city were holding its breath to witness a new beginning. The wedding took place in a small loft in West Loop, where warm string lights draped from the ceiling softened every edge of the room. There was no loud music, no long tables, no unfamiliar guests. Only the closest people. A few of Nathan's old friends, Martha, Anthony, and several trusted staff members from Bellagio. Everything was simple, carefully prepared. White chrysanthemums arranged in small bouquets, rustic wooden chairs, and the faint scent of vanilla from a tiny wedding cake perched near the window. I wore a plain white dress, my hair loosely pulled to one side. Sophie was my little bridesmaid, dressed in cream lace and wearing a flower crown Martha had woven for her. When I stepped inside, Nathan was waiting at the end of the room, his eyes never leaving me. It wasn't the look of a man dazzled by a bride, it was the look of someone who had walked beside me through my darkest nights and had finally arrived at the light. The minister kept the vows short. Nathan squeezed my hand when I said, "I do," and I looked straight into his eyes when I spoke my promises. When he leaned down to kiss me, the room seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Sophie shattered the silence with a loud clap and a triumphant shout. "Yeah, they're finally real parents now." Laughter filled the room, but I only looked at her, my heart bursting. The evening ended with a small meal, no champagne, no dancing, just honest conversation, warm hugs, and glances that didn't need words. When everyone had left, Nathan and I stood by the large window, watching the city lights shimmer below. He took my hand gently, the way he had from the first moment he stepped into my life. "This isn't the end," he murmured. "This is the beginning." I nodded and rested my head on his shoulder, breathing in the steadiness of the man I had chosen, not just as love, but as home. From that day on, I was no longer Rachel Livingston, no longer the woman running from shadows. I was Rachel Callahan, wife, mother, and someone who had started again from the very place she once thought her life had ended. And for the first time in my life, the future didn't scare me anymore. I stood in front of the main building of Roosevelt University with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a brand new notebook in my other hand, my heart pounding like that of a freshman stepping onto campus for the very first time. No one looked at me like a stranger. No one knew that the 32-year-old woman walking into class that morning had once been forced to abandon her dream of college because of a controlling man and a life that left no room for escape. I walked on my own in white sneakers, my hair tied neatly back, wearing the beige coat Nathan had bought for me at a small shop during our trip to New York a few months earlier. He had been the first person to lay a hand on my shoulder when I hesitantly told him I wanted to go back to school. He didn't just say, "Okay," he said, "It's time," then transferred enough money into my personal account to cover 4 full terms of tuition, plus an additional amount, so I wouldn't have to work more hours during the early percentford months. He never needed me to know the exact number, only leaving a message that said, "Investing in the person you love is never a loss." I cried when I read it, not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, someone believed in my worth more than I did. My first class was Communication and Social Behavior, taught by a middle-aged woman with a kind smile and sharp, perceptive eyes. I chose a seat near the window, where sunlight filtered in through a thin curtain. On the first page of my notebook, I wrote the words, "The first day of the rest of my life." I wrote them in blue ink, the letters trembling slightly because of the emotion swelling inside my chest. During the break, a young woman nearly 10 years younger than me turned and asked if I was coming back to school after many years away. I smiled, nodded, and the two of us began talking as if we had known each other for a long time. I told her a little about Sophie, about Bellagio, but nothing about Brent. Old wounds no longer needed a spotlight. When I came home that evening, Sophie ran to the door to greet me, holding a scribbled drawing of 3 people, me, her, and Nathan. Above it, in uneven but love-filled handwriting, were the words, "My family." I held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, then told her I had learned a new lesson that day about how people communicate through their eyes and gestures. Sophie blinked with interest, then ran off to show Nathan. He was reading the newspaper in the living room, and when she leaped into his lap, he laughed, set the paper aside, lifted her up, and looked at me with warmth. "Do you see yourself taking steps toward the woman you once dreamed of becoming?" he asked. I nodded, setting down my bag and sitting beside him. "I'm not dreaming anymore, Nathan. I'm living it." He squeezed my hand, and in that moment, I knew that every fear, every failure from my past was slowly fading behind me. No one could take my dream from me again. No one could control me through fear. I was Rachel Callahan, student, mother, wife, and a woman who had risen from the wreckage to live a life she chose, and I would never lose that again. Sophie had slowly blossomed into a lively, confident child who shone brightly in her own way. Every morning she woke with a radiant smile, her backpack slung over her shoulders, skipping toward her classroom, and always waving at me before rushing into the schoolyard. Her teacher said she was a natural leader, always helping the shy kids, always listening with genuine care. She loved telling stories about me, about Dad Nathan, about the nights we spent reading together or the ice cream trips we took after each of my exams. Our new life allowed her to grow up surrounded by safety and love, without fear of someone shouting, without shrinking whenever a door slammed too hard. Watching her each day made it clear that healing myself wasn't only for me, it was a gift I owed to her. One evening after Sophie had fallen asleep, I sat at my desk editing a half-finished essay when Nathan walked in and placed a printed document gently on the table. It was a registration form for a firearms training course. He didn't say a word. He simply handed it to me and waited. I picked it up, reading each line carefully, then looked at him. "I thought you didn't want me involved in anything dangerous anymore," I said. He sat down beside me, placing his hand over mine. "I don't want you afraid anymore. Not because I'm around, but because you know you can protect yourself and the people you love." On my first day at the shooting range, I stood silently in front of a long row of metal lockers, my hands trembling slightly as I held a Glock for the first time. The crack of gunfire echoing through the training room made my heart race not with paralyzing fear, but with the adrenaline of confronting a past that no longer owned me. My instructor was a sharp, patient woman in her 40s who taught me how to breathe, how to hold my stance, and most importantly, how to stay calm under pressure. My first bullets landed far from the target, but I didn't quit. I returned every weekend, practicing steadily, watching myself change, bit by bit. One afternoon when I came home from practice, I walked into the living room and saw Sophie playing a cops and robbers game with her dolls. She looked up and asked, "Mom, did you go practice being a superhero again?" I laughed and scooped her into my arms. "Not a superhero. I'm just learning not to let myself be weak anymore. Each time I stood before the target, I wasn't just learning to control a gun, I was learning to control myself. I learned how to breathe deeply, how to stand firm, how not to let the past dictate my future. I learned to believe I had the right to be safe, to be strong, and to shape my life on my own terms. Those lessons weren't in any university syllabus. There were no grades, no certificates, but they became the quiet foundation that held me steady every day. Amid schoolwork, motherhood, cooking dinners, and helping Nathan plan the opening of a second Bellagio location, I kept going to the shooting range. Not because I loved guns, but because I loved the way I felt in control of my own life. It was a feeling I had never known before, one I could no longer imagine living without. And each time I watched Sophie laugh in the kitchen, or felt Nathan's hand rest on my shoulder when I showed him my first A in communication, I knew how far I had come. No one could ever take that away from me again. No one could ever make me so afraid that I disappeared into silence. I was Rachel Callahan. And I was living the life I chose, one bullet, one step, one smile at a time. The news of Dimitri's death arrived on a Monday morning, through a brief call from Anthony while I was preparing breakfast for Sophie. He said Dimitri had been found dead in a luxury apartment on the outskirts of Brooklyn, with no signs of struggle, no clear evidence of foul play, yet everyone understood this was not an accidental death. Nathan wasn't surprised. I saw it in his eyes as he heard the news. He simply nodded, then quietly sat down at the dining table, finishing his cup of coffee in silence. I knew he was calculating. Dimitri's disappearance wasn't a period at the end of the sentence. It was only a shift in power. A vacuum like that never stays empty, someone is always ready to step into it. And indeed, just a few days later, the first whispers about a new group rising from Eastern Europe began spreading through the underground world. Unlike Dimitri, they didn't just want money, they wanted influence. Nathan called me into his office one evening after Sophie had gone to sleep. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of the clock. He sat there, his eyes deep, as if looking straight through time. "Rachel, I can't promise this world will always be safe. Life with me means there will be dangers coming from shadows you may not see. But I need you to understand that I will always do everything in my power to protect you and Sophie. Still, if the day ever comes when I'm not fast enough, you must be strong enough to keep living, to protect yourself and our daughter." I stepped closer and placed my hand over his, saying nothing for several seconds. Then I looked directly into his eyes. "I know exactly what world I'm living in. And I'm not choosing to leave. Not because I'm fearless, but because, for the first time in my life, I no longer want to run. I'm not just choosing to love you. I'm choosing this life, choosing to own it, with all the risks that follow. That is something the woman before me couldn't do, but I can. Nathan nodded, his hand tightening around mine, warm and full of trust. Rachel's story is not only a journey of escaping violence or finding love, it is the journey of a woman who dared to rise from her wounds, who dared to learn how to protect herself, who dared to face her past and choose to live fully in her present. We share this story in the hope that it reaches those who are still in the dark, who are tired, who feel trapped inside fears that seem to have no exit. Do you see a part of yourself somewhere along Rachel's path? Have you ever felt the urge to give up, only to wonder if you could hold on just a little longer? We would love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and share what you feel from your heart, because sometimes your story may be the strength someone else desperately needs. If you've found meaning in this story and would like to hear more heartfelt journeys filled with depth and humanity, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, and share the video so we can continue spreading meaningful messages every day. We will keep bringing you stories that touch emotions, touch truth, and help you find pieces of yourself within them. Thank you for spending your time with us. May you and your loved ones always have good health, a peaceful mind, and a life full of joy and hope. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.